So, Chapter 13, or Episode 13, as Arknights is insistent on referring to the main story as episodes instead of chapters, is a pretty direct follow-up upon the events of Chapter 12. Yes, I am referring to it as chapters. Arknights, you're gonna have to adjust yourself to me, not the other way around. The Arknights trio are reunited. Rhodes Island and the survivors from Norport are being escorted by the Duke of Windermere, and the Sarkaz and Victorian Dukes are posturing against each other, all while our wonderful band of reformed terrorists Reunion are eking out a life for themselves. So things aren't looking good for our good guys, and they're going to get a whole lot worse before they get any bit better. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves just yet, and let's discuss the whirlpool that is passion and if it's any good or not. Starting off, we'll cover the gameplay. So what's the stick of this chapter? Well, the cannon from chapter 10 makes a return, so Mudrock will be your best friend. In addition to that, we got ourselves a pretty unintrusive addition, the blood calling altars. When you kill an enemy, they're going to drop an item called a blood amber, and our blood calling altars will be able to convert these ambers back into enemies. So how are you going to deal with these altars if they can create infinite enemies? Well, there are two ways. One is you absolutely burst down the blood amber. They can be just outright killed, so if you drop a whiner, they're going to be wiped out. Additionally, there is a more efficient way that the event is going to push you towards, and that is W's anti-Sarkaz witchcraft bombs. No, we don't know how W created these, but they are credited to her by Hodra in game. All you gotta do is deliver these bombs to the blood calling altar, and blood calling ambers will no longer be able to be revived. Additionally, the Sanguinarch can be weakened by these bombs, so you know what to do. Deliver them to the Sanguinarch and low diff that fraud. So the mechanic overall is pretty solid. I have to say that being able to pretty much ignore it for the most part is nice, but you do need to have a lot of DPS to do so. And with all that being said about the mechanic, what's the story? There's quite a lot going on. I really enjoyed how this chapter was told, constantly shifting the POV to many different characters throughout the story. For example, Hodra, Logos, and Siege. Being in the heads of characters besides the Doctor for a prolonged period of time was pretty great. Specifically, I enjoyed how both Logos and Amia view the Doctor, but aside from that, what actually occurs? Well, I touched on it a little bit earlier, but things aren't looking great for our protagonists. But we're going to start out with Reunion first, because they are pretty uninvolved in the narrative. For better or worse, in my opinion, it's a little bit worse, but I did enjoy the Reunion storyline. Reunion, they are helping the infected refugees of the Victorian crisis, defenseless civilians, newly infected Victorians, and even the Sarkaz. Tallulah is settling into her new role as a figure just to attract new recruits. She's still a prisoner, mind you, but she's allowed to have some level of freedom. Guard is helping out in the day-to-day runnings of Reunion, organizing patrols and handing out medicine to all those who need it. But the situation is quite dire. Medicine is running out, so Reunion is forced to head towards an old Reunion medicine factory. Hopefully, it will still be unoccupied, but of course, nothing can go their way. And the factory is occupied by infected refugees. Guard is able to get in by being quite polite, but unfortunately, the infected refugees have killed a Sarkaz who sought refuge amongst them, and the Sarkaz is about to explode in an Originium explosion. And of course, these refugees have been shoving all of the infected deaths into one room, and that room is just about to blow, so things do go up in flames, and Guard doesn't make it out, unfortunately. He does, however, manage to save a little bit of medicine for the Reunion movement. Personally, I wasn't a big fan of Guard, but I'm sure he had his own fandom out there. But I think it is time to move on to other stories, at least for now. These other stories can be broken down into three main categories: the Arknights trio, the Glasgow gang, and Rhodes Island. And we will start with the Arknights trio. Of course, being reunited, they are on the run from the Sarkaz, and managing to lay low for a little bit of time, Hodra is able to get a nice little glow up. My man's got his drip on and he's ready to become playable. However, things aren't all rosy for him just because he's playable. My man's got to investigate some suspicious activity around Londinium. And while doing so, they find Sorkaz altars. These altars are being set up by the Sanguinarch so that he can perform some hidden goal. But the Dark Knights trio is going to need a little bit more recon before they can confirm what that is. So let's just jump over to Rhodes Island, who at the same time is escaping Northport with the Glasgow gang aboard the Duke of Windermere's ship. Delphine gets a nice reunion with her mom. However, this is cut pretty short as the Sorkaz immediately launch a counterattack against the Duke's fleet. Despite putting up a valiant fight, the Sanguinarch and the Damacy cluster, yes, they are alive, infiltrate the ship, and the Duke of Windermere is killed. Pretty sad. I am quite upset by the CG. She literally did nothing wrong. She was just chilling, minding her daughter. But that's not the worst of it. Amia is attacked by Salus, a member of the Confessarius, and she is knocked out. The Doctor does pursue Amia despite the dangers to themselves, but is severely injured and is thankfully saved by Logos and Ascalon before anything major can happen to him. He only suffers a few broken bones. Amia unfortunately has a bit of soul searching to do. Salus tried to steal the Sorkaz crown from her, but Amia instinctively prevented this from happening. As a result, she's forced to confront the will of the Sorkaz. And despite being berated as an outsider by them, she is able to just call them cringe and move on, conquering the crown of the Sorkaz. At the same time Amia is doing all this, Logos discovers the same vampiric ritual circles as the Dark Knights trio. So the Sanguinarch is definitely making some big moves right now. But that's not all for Rhodes Island. The Confessarius himself appears before Shining Nightingale and Calcit, revealing his goal of creating a new Sorkaz crown. But to accomplish this goal, he requires a special ingredient, Nightingale. But even more than that, the Confessarius wants Shining to kill him in order to become one and become the eternal king of the Sorkaz. Shining seriously considers this option, but she is stopped by Nightingale, and as such, the Confessarius escapes with Nightingale, forcing Rhodes Island to move on from their current base of operations. And looping back around to the Glasgow gang, we get to see what's up with them post the death of the Duke of Windermere. Well, the Duke's soldiers took the uninfected refugees and left everyone else behind, infected civilians and soldiers alike. This includes the daughter of the deceased Duke, Delphine. So sieges are bone to pick with the nobility and the soldiers is growing. Siege even attacks a doctor who refuses to accept he's been abandoned. After this little scuffle, a Trilby Asher appears before Siege, giving her a little gift of medicine and ammunition, additionally giving Siege a little bit of treasonous advice. You know, I appreciate you betraying the Duke of Castor, but that doesn't make me forgive the Trilby Asher for what they've done. At least there was one of them that has a bit of a conscience on them. But thanks to this advice, Siege knows what she has to do. She has to form a little bit of an army of her own. And she immediately goes to help Horn. Fighting alongside Horn and her soldiers, Siege is able to hold his position for over a week without any backup from the Victorian forces, even being able to drive the Sorkaz off at the cost of shattering one of their great weapons. Despite the potential risks, Siege is able to survive without being infected, a miraculous event. After the events of these battles, Siege decides to form the Exemplars, her own private army, consisting of both infected and non-infected soldiers and civilians. And they are, despite their shortcomings, a pretty effective fighting force. But you're probably wondering by now how all this rambling ties together. There's a simple answer: Brentwood. A pretty unremarkable Victorian town. Unremarkable except for the fact that a massive vampire ritual circle has been built there. And of much lesser importance than that, the dead corpse of a god resides there. Said dead god having powers over space and time, being the god made into Mossima's lock and key. The Dark Knights trio discovered it while looking for clues about the Sorkaz activity in the area. The combined forces of Rhodes Island and the Exemplars forced the Sorkaz out of Brentwood. Anyway, long story, slightly less long. Attack the cave with God in it, kill the immortal vampire, and save not London. What could possibly go wrong? In fairness, not much. Siege and the Exemplars handled the outside, while the Sorkaz led by Hoderer attack with Rhodes Island. They pretty successfully infiltrate this cave and are able to take relative control over the firmament inside. That is, of course, until the Sanguinarch appears. Ami and Logos have to deal with him, and they do a pretty bang-up good job at it. However, the Sanguinarch finds some Tikaz blood within him, and that gives him a little bit of a power-up, to the point that he's even able to direct the direction of the firmament's will. Pretty cool, but my glorious queen Amia would not fall for such a feeble attempt. Amia calls him cringe, and then unleashes the full power of the Crown of Sorkaz, blasting a hole straight through his body. A fatal wound, only made not fatal by the fact that the Sanguinarch can control blood. And the Arknights trio arrive shortly after this point, forcing the Sanguinarch off the side of the firmament and into the great void beyond. So the day is won. And yeah, that's pretty much chapter 13. Of course, some setup for chapter 14 has to happen. If you know, you know. So there is some Teresa stuff. Chen and Bagpipe are also there, following the events of Reed Alter's event, and I'm sure Reed herself is not far behind. But more so than that, I got a little presidential alert for you. The girls are fighting. Eblana and Tallulah have come to blows. Eblana wanted to recruit Tallulah to her cause, and Tallulah called her cringe, which is extremely based of our glorious terrorist. The infected one, not the Irish one. And I'm sure Reunion in Dublin will have problems in the future. And that is chapter 13, the whirlpool that is passion. Overall, I want to say it was a pretty good chapter. I did, for the most part, enjoy the events that occurred, and it was doing a lot of setup. Unfortunately, other than removing the Sanguinarch from play, the chapter hasn't really accomplished much in the overall story. Not that that's a bad thing. Based on the leaks I've seen from chapter 14, the real story progression is going to be done in that chapter, so unfortunately this is a bit of a setup chapter, which may take away quite a bit of your enjoyment from the story. Overall, I think the story is heading in a pretty great direction. Amia, of course, is making even more moves into becoming the king of the Sorkaz, and Logos is doing his best to support her. Siege has come a long way. She is stopping, slowly but surely, being a passive actor in the situation within Londinium, which I'm sure is making a lot of people happy that she's getting a bit of focus as an active participant instead of reacting to stuff that comes her way. The Arknights trio is a pretty enjoyable read. If you don't like any of these members for whatever reason, you might not enjoy that section of the story, which I can understand. I know W isn't exactly a lot of people's favorite characters, but I always do enjoy our little bombing sociopath. And of course, Reunion. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of the members of Reunion that we are getting a lot of focus on, but Tallulah will always be my ride or die. So I'm very happy seeing her get some story progression. And hopefully, not in chapter 14, but maybe in chapter 15 or 16, we get a playable Tallulah. I am riding on that copium, however, as it's likely never going to happen. But you can only hope. Other than that, I do actually wish to hear some of your negative comments down below in that comment section. I, for one, do enjoy Act 2's story, so I know I am kind of biased towards it. Even though I am correct, I do want to hear your objectively not my opinions. And with all that being said, I'm going to wrap this up. Y'all be good people, and I will talk to you in the next one. Listen, I didn't mention her until now, but Ursula, she's a mighty fine Sorkaz. Like, you know, I'd balk for her.